By Erev Sukkos, it's only a day away. And to some degree, in my mind, I thought that by the time we get closer to Sukkos, we have three major concerns: food, weather, mostly rain, and wait tzeit. I'm sure someone might want to add to the list to make sure the Luvan Esrog is ready as well. But wait tzeit. A nice rhyme, but the words that rhyme are actually in two different languages. Is that the general rule is that we wait on the first night of Sukkot and the second night usually of Sukkot, that we wait until it is true nightfall to fulfill the special mitzvah of eating the evening meal in the sukkah. In the Torah scheme, so let's say in the land of Israel, where there would be 7 days Sukkot and then 1 day Shmini Atzeres, and Simchas Torah would be on the same day as Shmini Atzeres. So that first night of Sukkot has a much, much different status than any other meal, whether it's Yantiv or Chol HaMoed. That first night, we need to eat in the Sukkah. And we need to wait for Tzeit. Tzeit HaKochavim, when the right number and the right size of stars are visible. We generally rely on calculations, on time stipulated in the calendar, in the shul bulletin, to achieve that rather than actually assessing the actual stars in the sky. Though if one were out camping and didn't have his smartphone with him, so it would be valid to, with some skill, to judge on the situation of what's doing in the sky. Now this ruling to wait until Tzeit, to wait until nighttime to have that evening meal of Sukkot, and for us outside of Israel on the first two nights. So that is based upon what we call a Gezerah Shava, that there are two sources that are similar to one another, and therefore we draw parallels and implications of one to the other. So the starting point of this Gezerah Shava of comparing two sources, two phrases, words, it starts with the first holiday on the Jewish calendar. That is Pesach. And Pesach is in Nisan. That's the first month on the Jewish calendar. We have two psukim in the Torah that seem to be very clear about the proper time for fulfilling mitzvahs of Pesach night. And that we find in Parshas Bo, V'achlu et habasar b'layla hazeh, tzli eshu matzot amirorim yochluhu, that you should eat the meat, which is the meat of the Korban Pesach, of the Paschal offering, Paschal lamb. You shall eat it b'layla hazeh, on this night. And it's to be eaten together with matzahs and maror. And then 10 psukim later, the Torah tells us, Barishon ba'aba'asar yom lachodesh, by Erev tochlu matzot. We look at Erev Pesach, and we're looking into the night, into the same first month, by Erev tochlu matzot, that in the evening you shall eat matzos. So it appears rather clear from these psukim that all the support that one needs to make a declaration that on Pesach night, one must wait for nighttime to fulfill certainly the mitzvah that we see in the verses. First, the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, and the matzahs. And that's the way we do it today. Even in the absence of the Korban Pesach, we tie everything to the matzah, and that the time that's required for the matzah is what we require of everything else, except Kadesh Urchatz. You want to sing the 15 steps, before we say Kiddush, so you can do that before the proper astronomical nighttime. But already with Kiddush is the first of the 4 cups of wine. And even though the 4 cups of wine are not mandated in the Torah, again, we make the association that everything that was set up, that the Kol Takin Rabbanim Kain the Araita Tikkun, that when Rabbanim made legislation, they made it parallel to parameters in the Torah. And so even though the 4 cups are from rabbinic institution, their guidelines, and here the time is modeled by what the proper time for matzah is. And in our bulletin, for example, for Pesach, we will list like the earliest time for reciting Kiddush at the Seder. Pesach itself, the Korban Pesach was slaughtered and prepared on the 14th of Nisan, but it was to be eaten on the 15th at night, the night after the 14th day. So Pesach itself begins, what we call the holiday of Pesach, Chag HaMatzot, begins on the evening of the 15th, and of the Shalosh Regalim, of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, one other, namely Sukkos, also begins on the 15th of its month of Tishrei. And because of the calendar date, the Gezerah Shava, this equating 2 sources were made, and suggesting that guidelines for Pesach must inform Sukkos. And as such, we are generally very makpid, very stringent in making sure that we do not recite the Kiddush in the Sukkah, which is the start of our meal, prior to the proper onset of halachic night, what we call Seit HaKochavim, the appearance of stars, and again, meaning the right number and the right size of stars. So as you know, and probably the reason that you're on, whether it impacts you personally or intellectually, is intriguing, but this year presents a challenge. At Torah Or, we can only fit 20% of our normal capacity, approximately. So if in recent years we've had 200 people in the sukkah for certain meals, we're talking, approximately 40, low 40s that can fit in the sukkah at any one time. And that situation is being faced by communities elsewhere, maybe communities like ours, but they could be communities like in Manhattan, where people rely on synagogue or other type of communal sukkahs that they join together with other people, and with social distancing, the same sukkah, which in many cases cannot be made any larger, is going to hold much fewer people. And as a result, in order to accommodate all the people that are interested in eating the sukkah, and granted it's not as many as normally would eat in our sukkah, but in order to accommodate the people who do want to eat, we anticipated, and now we could say for sure, we know that it's true, but we anticipated that we would need to have shifts of people eating in the sukkah. Very interestingly, this is not a new phenomenon in halacha. The Gemara in Psachim, in the tractate on Pesach, already records that in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, on the Seder night, that people took shifts on the available land to sit and to eat the matzahs, the maror, and the Korban Pesach People gathered. It's a pilgrimage holiday. And people had to be by the Beit HaMikdash to have their lamb slaughtered. So you had a huge, huge number of people in Yerushalayim for Pesach, and at least the beginning of Pesach. And there was not enough land for people to eat simultaneously. And what would happen is that they drew lots, and the first shift was assigned to their land, and they would go through the Seder, they would tell the story, they would do the Magid, and when they finished eating from the Korban Pesach, they would bench, and the last part of the Haggadah, with the praises to Hashem and the fourth cup of wine, people would go up on rooftops and finish the Seder there. But a rooftop was not considered the land of Israel, so that's why the Seder, the main part of the Seder, could not take place. So we already find in the Gemara this concept of shifts and of rotating available space so that more and more people can observe the mitzvah properly. But of course, that shift first started with Seita Kochavim, and which meant, that depending upon how many shifts there were people who were eating rather late. For us, in practical terms, Seita Kochavim will be at 7:40 tomorrow evening. And so if we started a meal, at 7:40, and forget about the people coming in just for Kiddush and a mini meal and benching, but it's so it could be you're talking about, or even you want to include that first mini shift. But so from 7:40 be the first, and then the second shift might be 9 o'clock, and then a third shift if we would have needed at 10 o'clock. It's late for people. Some people literally can't eat that late, and it's certainly not the part of Simchas Yom Tov, that's for sure. So it really did not seem to be practical to entertain anything more than a short Kiddush and bread-only meal benching shift, followed by a shift for a meal in the classical Seita Kochavim time. To first have another group of people come in afterwards would seem to be very difficult on people. And so I began to explore whether there was room to consider having an earlier shift rather than a later shift. We are well aware that there are many weeks during the year. In fact, it's really months when it comes to Shabbos. And for some, sometimes for Yontiv, and even within Pesach, certainly the last days, of Pesach, we know that we start early. First of all, we always have a mitzvah of Tosefes, of adding to Shabbos or adding to Yontiv. So when we light candles, if we're lighting, on the standard time of lighting candles in our area, in this country is generally taken to be 18 or 20 minutes. Shul time, we use the 18-minute time. And when one does that and starts Shabbos at that time, so that they have fulfilled the mitzvah of adding or taking from a profane day, a day without any holiness, and we're transforming it by the human action. We're transforming it into a holy day, and we're extending the number of hours that astronomically would be in that holy day by at least another 18 minutes. But we know, and especially when it comes to early Shabbos for so many months of the year, that we can start Shabbos as early as approximately a couple of hours before sunset, an hour and a half before sunset, approximately, what's known as Plag Mincha. And the question is, can we do this? Can we do this for Sukkos? It will be pretty bright outside, starting an early shift at Plag Plag HaMincha. And that's the question that I turned to Rav Hershel Schachter. Rav Hershel Schachter wound up, I submitted my questions in writing, and he issued a written response to my questions. Every point made is really based on questions asked for our community, but again, will be applicable to many other communities. Therefore, at least one reason, I'm sure, therefore the name of the shul is not mentioned, because it's not just a Torah or issue. But it is a monumental tshuva. So first, let's look at some sources. The Shulchan Aruch records clearly, Afilu kiddush ein levarech bizman tosefet yom tov. Let's take for granted, forget about making a very early yontiv, but just take a person on the Erev Pesach who's going to light candles 18 minutes before sunset. So the woman, and it could be the entire family under certain circumstances, is ready to start all of the restrictions and the mitzvah, positive mitzvahs, 18 minutes earlier than absolutely required. But says the Shulchan Aruch that you may not recite even the Kiddush of the Seder. Forget about the matzah, and if you had a Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, for sure not. But not even the Kiddush, you may not say before the proper time. Very, very black and white, very succinct statement. But the truth is that not all agree. The Chasam Sofer, a very major source in Jewish law and learning, says, you know what? You can make the first dipping of the Seder before nightfall. You can start, you can make the Kiddush obviously first. Like, maybe I shouldn't word obviously, but chronologically, the Kiddush would come first. You could do the Kiddush, you could do the dipping, and you can even start with the story, the Magid mitzvah of retelling the story of the Exodus. And according to the Chasam Sofer, the only thing that, or the two items that require nighttime would be the eating of the matzah and the Korban Pesach when we have it. So that you could, according to the Chasam Sofer, you could start to say that early. You would just have to wait until the matzah, and he doesn't specify, as far as I know, whether or not you have to make the bracha, but other sources add that the bracha of eating the matzah has to go together, with the eating of the matzah itself, and for that you have to wait, for nighttime. But another major source, the Tosfos HaRosh, says, you know what? This is an earth-shattering statement. Be ready. Seatbelts on. Afilu matzah v'korban pesach muta bizman tosefet yom tov. That you could even fulfill the mitzvah and matzah during that period of added holiness. Again, for us, that's always 18 minutes, but you can have that early holiness as early as Plag HaMincha. That hour and a quarter of halachic hour beforehand. That is a monumental statement by the Tosfos HaRosh. And Rav Hershel Schachter, Rosh Kollel at Yeshiva University, recognized as one of the most outstanding poskim today, and a major student of Rav Soloveitchik, Zichrono Livracha. So Rav Schachter writes in his tshuva, B'sha'at hadechak, under extenuating circumstances, efshar lahakel ketosel karosh. It is possible to be lenient according to the ruling of the Tosos Harosh. And to start, we're talking about Pesach now, that you could start, if it had an extenuating circumstance at Pesach time, that you could start the Seder early, as long as it was the Plag HaMincha or later. Now, to make it clear, this is not a ruling for every year. In fact, I hope that none of us and none of the succeeding generations ever have to deal with this type of question, and especially with our scenario. There are related scenarios. So Schachter mentions one in the tshuva, and that is, people who are very frail, not able to stay up very late, and if they were to have to wait until that Seta Kochavim nightfall, that they would never be able to stay up, and they would have no Seder at all, so that would be a Shat HaDechak. But this ruling is for various types of extenuating circumstances. So we are talking this year only, and hopefully next year we have other things to speak about, and nothing similar as this. This is a Shat HaDechak. Rav Schachter specifies very, very clearly that we're talking about this year, this Sukkos, as being observed at a time that for most, if not every community, there are a lot of precautions in because of our concerns for the COVID-19 virus. And plus at this point, we're already being warned about the possibility of spike happening as we come closer to the winter time. So this was all up to now really a discussion, mostly, at least when looking at the sources, were all Pesach sources that we were talking about. But the leniency, in truth, the leniency is even more easily applied to Sukkos. And Rav Schachter says that even if you want to grant the Shulchan Aruch statement about you can't even make Kiddush on Pesach before nightfall, which is based on statements of Tosfos in Masechet Psak. He says, basically, even if you accept that, you could still say that the restrictions do not apply to Sukkos. So think about it for a moment. If on Pesach, at nightfall, we're obligated to, to fulfill it during nightfall. We try to do it as early as possible for more than one reason. But we have that obligation of eating matzah. Let's talk in terms of the biblical requirement of eating matzah. So we have to eat matzah on the 15th balayla, by Erev, at nighttime. So what would that mean if we're making this Gezerah Shava, if we are equating, we're making equal Shaveh, we're making the 15th of Tishrei equal, parallel to the 15th of Nisan, the month of Pesach. So when we sit down to our meal, if it was a full Gezerah Shava, when we sit down to our meal on Sukkos, what should we be making Hamotzi on? Well, you would say we have to make Hamotzi on matzah, because that's what we're doing in the 15th of Nisan. We're making Hamotzi on matzah. So in the 15th of Tishrei, for the holiday of Sukkos, you would think possibly that you have to make your Hamotzi on matzah, but we do not do that. That's not required. So that's just one illustration of how we see right off the bat that we're not accepting all the stringencies of Pesach onto the holiday of Sukkot as well. No. So again, at this point in Rav Schachter's tshuva responsum, Rav Schachter is saying that even on Pesach, if there were extenuating circumstances, there would be room under those acceptable circumstances to start the Seder early, and certainly so when there are extenuating circumstances on Sukkos, which many authorities hold is not as strictly defined in terms of the fulfillment of the mitzvah, that in extenuating circumstances, Schachter, that we can rely on the more lenient of the giant opinions in halacha. So then, Rav Salah, actually, are there any questions right now? Okay, I will leave time at the end, God willing, and Bli Neder for questions. Rav Schachter asked a question on his own ruling. You know, when we make Shabbos early in June, then we come back to shul, and maybe you went to shul wearing sunglasses because the sun was strong, and on the way home from shul you're wearing sunglasses because even though it's Shabbos, the sun is very bright outside yet. It's not at the horizon. It's every minute, you know, the day, every second, it's getting closer and closer to sunset, but you can still see the sun, and the sun can still blind you. But we're going home, and we're going to make an early Shabbos. It's going to be clear from our behavior that even though, let's say, a non-Jewish neighbor is looking at the clock and it's 7 o'clock on a Friday in June, and it's daytime, and it's still Friday, and it's still Friday day, be it Friday afternoon. For us, it's Shabbos. And for ourselves, we're going to know that if we decided that we needed to go look for a book in a room, and for some reason it'd be dark in that room, that would not allow to turn on the light switch. And if we realized that the oven setting was not at what we wanted it at for Shabbos, it's going to be too late for me. I already davened in shul. I accepted Shabbos upon myself. I davened the Shabbos Mariv. I can't adjust that, even though it's bright outside. Even though had I decided not to make an early Shabbos, I could have adjusted that knob. But it's clear that there's a whole list of activities. All the malachas, there are 39 major categories, and there are many, many, many subcategories of all actions that I can no longer do because I decided to accept Shabbos earlier. So it's very, very clear. And when you think about our situation, you know, we're going the first day of Yom Tov is Shabbos and the second day of Yom Tov is Sunday. If it was reversed, we would also have not as many actions, but, you know, on Yom Tov, depending upon the kind of stove that you have, we're allowed to adjust the flame. We're allowed to transfer a flame. We have let's say a yortzeit candle, you know, burning, and it's dark in my house, and one of the light bulbs blew out in a particular corner where I like to sit and read. So I could pick up that yortzeit candle and move it if I want to, or I could take another candle and light, you know, a candle from the already lit candle if it's Yom Tov, and I could go ahead and light another yortzeit candle near my favorite reading area and maybe have enough light to read. I can do certain actions on Yom Tov that I'm not allowed to do on Shabbos. So if I'm going from a Yom Tov into a Shabbos, if I were to make Shabbos early by taking time from Yom Tov, I would still have a very clear sign that because I'm accepting additional restrictions upon myself, would be a classical definition of starting the holiness of a day earlier. But when it's reversed, as it is this year, where the first day is Shabbos and the second day is Yontiv, so how do I demonstrate at 6:15 in the quote unquote evening, but when it's pretty bright outside, could we say that you're not allowed to actually start Yom Tov early when it really is astronomically Shabbos? And Rav Schachter paskined, yes, you can, because there are other differences between Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's not only a matter of malacha, of restricted activities, but to other authorities, definitely there are authorities that would require the restrictions of the prohibited activities to be a sign of that extra holiness. And then Shabbos, we can't add any more restrictions than the maximum. They just become more lenient once Yom Tov starts. Generally speaking, there'll be an exception in our particular case. But other authorities point to the fact that you have a mitzvah of simcha on Yom Tov, which you don't have on Shabbos, a tremendous mitzvah of joy on a Yom Tov, so that's something new. And we will have a new mitzvah of Sukkah on the Yom Tov as well. So Paskin again ruled that there are visible signs or tangible dimensions to going into Yom Tov, which demonstrates that it is a different day. However, we must make it clear that as long as it is astronomically Shabbos, even for those who are starting Yom Tov early and will have an early dinner in the Sukkah, that same person may not violate any activity prohibited on Shabbos. We can't defy in that regard the astronomical reality. We have the permission to start the Yom Tov early, but we cannot violate a Shabbos law. We can begin observing mitzvahs of the new Yom Tov, but not violate the Shabbos law. And, as such, I'm going to, I think, conclude my direct presentation with a couple of other practical concerns for those making an early Sukkos, and then open it up for questions. And some of what I'm going to say, you'll find in the new bulletin once it's released later today, but I will mention it now in the context of this to round out the presentation and then be open for your questions or comments. So those who are going to make an early Shabbos, it must be stressed that you cannot light candles. Even if you were to be transferring a flame, we may not transfer a flame while it is still astronomically Shabbos. So the lighting of our candles must be postponed until after 7:40, which would be the astronomical Tzeit HaKochavim, official nightfall and end of Shabbos. And it can be done later on. So you could do it, when you get home. When one makes Kiddush, this is a very interesting scenario, although in a way, many of us do this to some degree, not as drastically as will happen this Shabbos, first day of Sukkot, but we will recite a longer Kiddush than normal. Because in addition to Kiddush, we need to make Havdalah going from Shabbos into Yom Tov. So here, somebody's going to be someone is going to be sitting in the sukkah at, say, 6:30 approximately, holding a cup of wine, reciting the Bori Priyagofen, reciting the paragraph of Kiddush. They are going to skip the bracha on the Aish because we can't bring in the fire. So we're going to skip the blessing of Aish. People who are making Kiddush in the latest saying, if there were to be Aish present, which we probably could arrange. Thanks for reminding me. And just jotting myself a note. So it would be possible for the later shift to make the Aish during the Kiddush time, although practically having 40 people or 35 people in the sukkah at that time may not make it so practical to to do that. So they too can make the bracha later on at night when their candles are lit at home. But technically they could make that bracha. But those making the early sukkahs would not say the blessing on the flame, but they would say the blessing of Havdalah inside the Kiddush. Now, we do that often. On a Saturday night, depending upon what time a shul starts Mariv, it's very, very possible that when we recite the paragraph of Havdalah in our Shmona Esrei, that we're reciting that Havdalah when it's still too early to get our car keys or to flip on a light switch, to find a pen and write a note down of a great Torah thought that we had during the day. It would be too early. But you're allowed to utter the prayers already at that time, just not to implement them. So again, the person making early sukkahs would recite Kiddush, would skip the blessing on the Aish at that point, and would recite the Havdalah. So I think I'm going to stop here, and I will give you, if you have a question or a comment, please unmute yourself and share with us. Well, I thought I was organized, but crystal clear wasn't necessarily betting on.
Rabbi, I think it may be wise to point out the fact that if the first night it's raining, that people have to wait.
You know what? I'm not able to hear you so clearly. Could you move maybe closer to your mic? Or I could run and get my earplugs, but
I don't have a mic. But anyway, just to point out.
Oh, that's better. Go ahead.
No, the fact the first night that people have to wait, even if it rains, to wait to make Kiddush in the sukkah, which ordinarily you don't have to. In other words, basically to wait to see if it stops raining. There's a need to wait.
Well, right, but we won't be able to accommodate that too much. I did write about that in what will become the bulletin soon. So we only have the ability to wait maybe up to several minutes, not very long. In general, even our regular year, we don't wind up waiting that long. The wait could take sometimes as much as an hour because first we wait to see if it stops, and then we have to get the sukkah, something dry enough to sit in. But we won't have that kind of time this year to do that. So we wait a little bit, try to get a feel, and see if we can clean up the sukkah, but it wouldn't be waiting too long.
So, Rabbi, I have a question. Marcia Schrager, what is the earliest time that we could do Kiddush in the sukkah? On Friday night.
Right. So the minyan, if I believe, is called for 5:40 for mincha, right? 1 second.
The early Shabbos.
We're talking about oh, you're talking about tomorrow evening?
Yes,
The first night of Yontif, which is also the Shabbos.
correct.
Right, there's a little bit less of a question on that. That becomes only a Sukkos question instead of also a Shabbos question, which is presented on the second day. But the first minyan, I believe, is at 5:40. Angie, are you on? Is that correct? 5:40, right? Okay. Yes, I have it in my notes also. So the mincha starts at 5:40. The earliest time for making kiddush would be 5:50, 5:51. Say 5:51 is the earliest time to make kiddush.
So that's when Gary can go into the sukkah and make kiddush.
Well, he'll be davening. I mean, if he's in shul, he would be davening. The minyan would be davening at that point.
Okay,
Exactly when the sukkah is open for the kiddush people, I'm actually not going to respond to that because I can only respond to you halachically, but procedurally, I don't recall that was discussed by the committee, at least, or shared with me. So because at 5:50 approximately, 5:51, the shul will be davening an abbreviated Kabbalah Shabbos and a Mariv. So the people who are in shul for davening and then going into the sukkah, let's say, to have the mini meal, if they're davening, they won't get into the sukkah until a little bit after 6. But technically speaking, the kiddush could be made as early as 5:51. But in that case, it would have been said without davening Mariv, which is not the way we usually do it.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? All right. If I knew the Yiddish well enough, I'd give the standard phrases for the auctions. Eshtemol, Sveitemol, Drittemol. Is that how it goes? Yep. Going once, going twice. Okay, I'm going to wish everybody a Gemar Chatima Tova, because we're still going to judge for the rainfall on Hoshana Rabbah, and we're hoping that we won't see any of that rainfall until after Sukkot, just that our prayer should be accepted but not implemented until Sukkot is over. And I'm going to wish you all a good Shabbos and a Chag Sameach. Have a beautiful Yantiv, and we should all celebrate together and even have more of us in our Sukkah next year. Kol Tuv, thanks for joining. Wait, Bob, were you waving goodbye? Not 2 questions, just waving goodbye. Okay. All right. Okay. Signing off.